The Nika Riots of Constantinople, 532 AD, the rebellion that nearly toppled an empire. Welcome, dear listener, and welcome to the first chapter of our journey through 10 forgotten events that changed everything. Tonight, we step into a world of chaos, ambition, and defiance, a story that roared through the streets of Constantinople in 532 AD. So find a cozy spot, dim the lights, and let the whispers of history transport you to a city on the edge of ruin, the jewel of the East. Imagine a city where golden domes gleam under the sun, where the scent of spices mingles with the salty breeze from the Bosphorus. This was Constantinople in the early 6th century, the dazzling heart of the Byzantine Empire. At its helm stood Emperor Justinian, a ruler determined to resurrect the faded glory of Rome. His dreams were vast, laws codified, borders expanded, and monuments raised to the heavens. But beneath the grandeur, a storm was brewing. Constantinople was a city of contrasts. Wealthy nobles in silk robes brushed past laborers in tattered tunics. The air buzzed with the chatter of merchants, the prayers of priests, and the cheers of the masses. And nothing stirred those masses more than the thundering hooves of chariot racing. In the Hippodrome, the city's colossal arena, rival factions, the Blues and the Greens, clashed not just for sport, but for pride, power, and identity. Blues, Greens, and the fires of rivalry. The Blues and Greens weren't mere fan clubs, they were forces that shaped the soul of Constantinople. The Blues, favored by the elite, stood for order and tradition. The Greens, champions of the common people, simmered with resentment against the powerful. Their rivalry wasn't confined to the racetrack. It spilled into the streets, into politics, into every corner of life. Fights broke out, insults flew, and blood was shed over colors that defined more than just teams. What is it about competition that ignites such passion? How does a game become a mirror for society's deepest divides? For the people of Constantinople, chariot racing was a release, a battle cry, and soon a spark that would set the city ablaze. The day the crowd roared Nika. It was January 13th, 532 AD. The Hippodrome pulsed with energy as chariots tore across the sand. But the mood shifted when news spread. Several men from both factions had been arrested for murder after a recent brawl. The crowd demanded mercy, pleading for Justinian to pardon them. When he refused, their pleas turned to rage. Suddenly, the Blues and Greens, sworn enemies, united under a single word: Nika, victory. It was a chant that echoed through the stands, a call to arms that shattered the fragile peace. The mob poured out of the Hippodrome, a tidal wave of fury crashing through the city. They torched homes, looted shops, and toppled statues. The sky darkened with smoke as flames devoured markets and churches alike. Picture the scene: cobblestone streets alive with shouts, the crackle of fire, the glint of swords and torchlight. What drives a crowd to rebellion? How does anger transform into anarchy? For 5 days, Constantinople burned, and Justinian's throne trembled. Theodora's defiance. Inside the imperial palace, panic reigned. Advisors urged Justinian to flee, to abandon the city to the mob. Ships waited at the harbor, ready to whisk him to safety. He hesitated, torn between fear and duty. But then stepped forward Empress Theodora, sharp-witted, unyielding, and fearless. She faced her husband and his trembling court. Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss, she said. Royalty is a fine burial shroud. Her voice cut through the chaos, a blade of resolve. Fleeing was not an option. She would rather die an empress than live as a coward. Her words were a spark, reigniting Justinian's will to fight. Blood in the sand. Bolstered by Theodora's courage, Justinian turned to his generals, Belisarius and Mundus, men forged in war and loyal to the core. They devised a ruthless plan. The rioters had gathered in the Hippodrome, tens of thousands strong, proclaiming a new emperor in their defiance. It was there, in the arena that once rang with cheers, that the end would come. The gates slammed shut. Imperial troops stormed in, swords flashing. The rebels fought back, but they were no match for trained soldiers. The sand turned red as screams replaced chants. By the time the dust settled, over 30,000 lay dead, a staggering toll that silenced the cry of Nika forever. A new beginning amid the ashes. The Nika riots were crushed, but the cost was unthinkable. Half the city lay in ruins, palaces, baths, and basilicas reduced to charred husks. Yet Justinian saw opportunity in the wreckage. With the rebellion stamped out, he began to rebuild, pouring his energy into a vision of renewal. The Hagia Sophia, a cathedral of breathtaking beauty, would rise from the ashes, its dome a symbol of his unyielding ambition. But the scars remained. The people whispered of the massacre, of a ruler who chose slaughter over surrender. The Nika riots were more than a fleeting uprising. They were a warning. Power could be held, but only at a price. And what price is too high? What lessons linger in the rubble of a city reborn? As the sun set over a wounded Constantinople, Justinian stood stronger, yet the echoes of Nika lingered in the air, a reminder that even the mightiest empire could falter when its people rose as one. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest, 9 AD, the ambush that humbled Rome. Imagine a world where the mighty Roman Empire stretches across continents, its legions marching in perfect formation, its eagles gleaming under the sun. This was the empire at its zenith, a force that seemed unstoppable, a civilization that believed it could conquer the world. But in the dark, tangled woods of Germania, a different story was about to unfold, a story of cunning, betrayal, and a battle that would echo through the ages. This is the tale of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, where the pride of Rome met the fury of the Germanic tribes. How did a single ambush change the course of history? And what secrets lie hidden in the shadows of those ancient trees? The edge of empire. In the early years of the 1st century, the Roman Empire was a colossus, its borders pushing ever outward. To the north, beyond the Rhine River, lay Germania, a land of dense forests, fierce warriors, and untamed wilderness. The Romans saw it as a prize to be won, a frontier to be tamed. They sent their legions across the river, building forts, collecting taxes, and imposing their will on the tribes. But the Germanic people were not easily subdued. They were proud, independent, and deeply connected to their land. Among them was a man named Arminius, a prince of the Cherusci tribe, who had been raised in Rome, trained in its ways, and even granted Roman citizenship. Yet beneath his Roman veneer, Arminius harbored a secret, a burning desire to free his people from the yoke of empire. Arminius was a master of deception, a wolf in sheep's clothing. He served as an advisor to Publius Quinctilius Varus, the Roman governor of Germania, a man known for his arrogance and heavy-handed rule. Varus trusted Arminius, unaware that the young prince was plotting his downfall. In the autumn of 9 AD, Arminius saw his chance. He convinced Varus to lead 3 legions, over 15,000 men, into the heart of the forest, claiming that a rebellion needed to be quelled. Varus, eager to assert dominion, agreed, marching his troops into the unknown. But what awaited them in the shadows of Teutoburg Forest? And how did Arminius's betrayal set the stage for one of Rome's greatest defeats? The forest's embrace. The Teutoburg Forest was not a place for Roman legions. Its paths were narrow, its undergrowth thick, its canopy a blanket of darkness. The Romans, accustomed to open battlefields and disciplined formations, found themselves stumbling through mud and mist, their heavy armor a burden in the tangled terrain. Arminius, riding ahead, feigned loyalty, guiding the legions deeper into the woods. But as the Romans pressed on, the air grew heavy with foreboding. The forest seemed to close in around them, its silence broken only by the distant call of a raven, a harbinger of doom. Then, without warning, the ambush struck. From the shadows, Germanic warriors emerged, their faces painted, their spears glinting in the dim light. They struck with the fury of a storm, hurling javelins, slashing with swords, and vanishing back into the trees. The Romans, caught off guard, struggled to form ranks, their shields splintering under the onslaught. Panic spread like wildfire as the forest itself seemed to conspire against them, roots tripping their feet, branches clawing at their faces. For 3 days the battle raged, a brutal dance of steel and blood. The Romans fought valiantly, but the forest was not their ally. How did the Germanic tribes use the landscape to their advantage? And what role did the forest play in Rome's undoing? The fall of Varus. As the battle wore on, the Roman lines crumbled. Varus, once so confident, now faced the bitter truth. He had been betrayed, and his legions were doomed. Surrounded, wounded, and despairing, he chose the path of honor over capture. With a final defiant gesture, he fell upon his sword, his lifeblood seeping into the forest floor. His death was a blow to Roman morale, a signal that all was lost. The remaining soldiers, leaderless and broken, were hunted down, their cries swallowed by the trees. When the dust settled, the scale of the disaster became clear. 3 legions, nearly 20,000 men, had been annihilated. The Germanic tribes, led by Arminius, had achieved the unthinkable. They had humbled the might of Rome. The news sent shockwaves through the empire. Emperor Augustus, upon hearing of the defeat, is said to have wandered his palace crying, "Varus, give me back my legions." The loss was not just of men, but of pride, of invincibility. But what did this victory mean for the Germanic tribes? And how did it reshape the Roman Empire's ambitions? The legacy of Teutoburg. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest was more than a military defeat. It was a turning point. Rome's dreams of conquering Germania were shattered, its northern border forever marked by the Rhine River. The empire, once so sure of its destiny, now faced the limits of its power. For the Germanic tribes, the victory was a beacon of hope, a symbol of resistance against the tide of conquest. Arminius became a hero, his name etched into the annals of history as the man who defied Rome. Yet the battle's legacy is complex. It was not a simple tale of good versus evil, but a clash of cultures, of freedom versus order. The forest, once a place of shadow and fear, became a symbol of defiance, a reminder that even the mightiest empire could be brought low by the will of a determined people. But what lessons does Teutoburg teach us today? And how does its story resonate in a world still shaped by the echoes of empire? As the sun sets on the ancient battlefield, we are left with more questions than answers. What secrets lie buried beneath the forest floor? And what other forgotten events await us in the shadows of history? The Battle of Teutoburg Forest is a reminder that the past is never truly silent. It whispers through the trees, through the winds, through the dreams of those who dare to listen. The collapse of the Marib Dam in Yemen, 575 AD, the flood that drowned an empire. Imagine a land where the desert stretches endlessly, its golden sands shimmering under a relentless sun. Yet, in the heart of this arid expanse, there lies an oasis, a miracle of water and life, where lush fields bloom and ancient cities thrive. This was the kingdom of Saba, or Sheba, a civilization that flourished in what is now Yemen, sustained by one of the greatest engineering marvels of the ancient world, the Marib Dam. For centuries, this dam was the lifeblood of Saba, a symbol of human ingenuity and resilience. But in 575 AD, the unthinkable happened. The dam collapsed, unleashing a flood that would drown not just the land, but an entire empire. How did this catastrophe come to pass, and what secrets does it hold about the rise and fall of civilizations? An oasis in the desert. To understand the tragedy of the Marib Dam, we must first grasp its triumph. Built around the 8th century BCE, the dam was a masterpiece of engineering, a testament to the Sabaeans' mastery over their harsh environment. Spanning the Wadi Dana, the dam captured the seasonal rains, creating a vast reservoir that transformed the desert into a fertile paradise. Imagine fields of wheat and barley swaying in the breeze, orchards heavy with fruit, and gardens fragrant with myrrh and frankincense, the treasures that made Saba legendary. The dam was more than a structure, it was the heart of Saba's prosperity. Its waters irrigated over 25,000 acres of farmland, supporting a population of tens of thousands. The wealth it generated flowed through the veins of the kingdom, fueling trade routes that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. Saba became a crossroads of cultures, a hub where spices, silks, and stories were exchanged. But beneath this golden age, the seeds of disaster were quietly taking root. What warning signs did the Sabaeans miss? And how did their paradise begin to crumble? The cracks in the foundation. The Marib Dam was not invincible. Over centuries, it faced the relentless forces of nature, flash floods, silt buildup, and the slow creep of erosion. The Sabaeans, skilled as they were, had to maintain the dam with constant vigilance, repairing breaches and reinforcing its walls. Yet, as the kingdom grew, so did its challenges. Political strife, economic pressures, and perhaps a touch of complacency began to erode their diligence. Legends whisper of omens, cracks appearing in the dam's facade, strange dreams plaguing the priests, and whispers of a great flood foretold in ancient texts. The Quran itself speaks of the flood of Arim, a divine punishment for the Sabaeans' ingratitude. While the truth is shrouded in myth, historical accounts suggest that by the 6th century AD, the dam had suffered multiple breaches, each more severe than the last. The final blow came in 575 AD, when a catastrophic flood overwhelmed the weakened structure. But what caused this final fatal collapse? Was it nature's wrath, human neglect, or a combination of both? The day the waters broke. In the year 575 AD, the heavens opened and the rains fell with a fury unseen in generations. The Wadi Dana swelled, its waters pounding against the dam's ancient walls. The structure, already weakened by time and wear, groaned under the pressure. Then, with a deafening roar, the dam gave way. Imagine the scene: a wall of water, towering and unstoppable, crashing through the valley, swallowing everything in its path. Fields that had fed empires were submerged, homes were swept away, and the once thriving cities of Saba were left in ruins. The flood was not just a natural disaster, it was a death knell for the Sabaean civilization. The irrigation systems that had sustained their agriculture were destroyed, their trade routes severed, and their people scattered. Thousands fled, seeking refuge in distant lands, their exodus marking the end of an era. The great kingdom of Saba, once a jewel of the ancient world, faded into obscurity, its glory drowned beneath the waters of the Aram. But what became of the survivors? And how did this catastrophe reshape the region's future? A legacy submerged in sand. The collapse of the Marib Dam was more than the fall of a structure. It was the unraveling of a civilization. The Sabaeans' decline opened the door for new powers to rise, reshaping the cultural and political landscape of the Arabian Peninsula. Yet the memory of Saba lingered, woven into the fabric of legends and holy texts. The Queen of Sheba, who once ruled this land, became a figure of myth, her story echoing through the ages in tales of wisdom and wealth. In the centuries that followed, the ruins of the dam lay buried beneath the sands, a silent testament to a lost world. It wasn't until the 20th century that archaeologists rediscovered its remnants, piecing together the story of the people who dared to tame the desert. Today, efforts to restore the dam serve as a bridge between past and present, a reminder of the ingenuity and fragility of human endeavor. What lessons can we learn from the Sabaeans' rise and fall? And how does their story resonate in a world still grappling with the balance between nature and progress? As the sun sets over the ancient ruins of Marib, we are left with more questions than answers. What secrets lie buried beneath the sands, and what other forgotten events await us in the shadows of history? The collapse of the Marib Dam is a reminder that even the greatest empires are not immune to the forces of time and nature. It is a whisper from the past, urging us to listen, to learn, and to dream. The invention of the compass in China, 11th century, the needle that pointed the way to the world. Imagine a world where the vast oceans are uncharted, where sailors rely on the stars to guide their ships, and where the unknown stretches endlessly beyond the horizon. This was the world of the 11th century, a time when empires clashed, trade routes flourished, and the thirst for exploration was beginning to stir. In the heart of this world, in the Song dynasty of China, a quiet revolution was taking place, one that would change the course of history. This is the story of the invention of the compass, a humble tool that would unlock the seas, connect distant lands, and reshape the boundaries of the known world. How did a small, magnetized needle become the key to global exploration? And what secrets does its invention hold about the ingenuity of ancient China? A dynasty of innovation. To understand the birth of the compass, we must first step into the vibrant world of the Song dynasty. It was an era of prosperity, culture, and technological marvels. The streets of Kaifeng, the capital, bustled with scholars, merchants, and artisans. Paper money changed hands, printing presses churned out books, and the air was thick with the scent of innovation. The Song emperors, keen to strengthen their rule, encouraged advancements in science and engineering. It was in this fertile ground that the seeds of the compass were sown. But the compass did not emerge fully formed. It was the result of centuries of observation and experimentation. As early as the Han Dynasty, Chinese scholars had noticed the curious properties of lodestone, a naturally magnetic mineral. They observed that lodestone could attract iron and, when suspended, would always point in a specific direction. This discovery was initially used for divination and geomancy, the ancient practice of aligning buildings and cities with cosmic forces. But in the 11th century, something remarkable happened. Someone, perhaps a nameless artisan or a curious scholar, realized that this magnetic force could be harnessed for something far more practical: navigation. Who was the first to see the potential of the lodestone? And how did this simple observation transform into a tool that would guide ships across the seas? The birth of the compass. The earliest compasses were not the sleek instruments we know today. They were simple, often consisting of a magnetized needle floating in a bowl of water, its tip pointing south. This south pointing fish, as it was sometimes called, was a marvel of simplicity. But its impact was profound. For the first time, sailors could navigate without relying solely on the stars or the sun. They could chart their course even on cloudy days or in the dead of night, their ships guided by an invisible force that always knew the way. The compass quickly became a vital tool for the Song dynasty's burgeoning maritime trade. Chinese junks, with their sturdy hulls and billowing sails, ventured farther than ever before, carrying silk, porcelain, and spices to distant lands. The ports of Southeast Asia, India, and even the coast of Africa buzzed with the arrival of Chinese merchants, their ships laden with treasures. But the compass was not just a tool for trade, it was a symbol of China's growing power and influence. How did this invention shape the Song dynasty's ambitions? And what role did it play in the rise of global trade? A tool for exploration. As the compass spread beyond China's borders, its impact rippled across the world. Arab traders, who had long navigated the Indian Ocean, adopted the compass, their dhows slicing through the waves with newfound precision. From there, it reached the shores of Europe, where it would fuel the age of exploration. Imagine the scene: a sailor on a creaking ship, peering at a small, trembling needle, knowing that it pointed the way to uncharted lands. The compass became a beacon of hope, a guide through the unknown, and a key to unlocking the world's mysteries. But the compass was more than a navigational tool. It was a catalyst for change. It connected distant cultures, sparked the exchange of ideas, and laid the groundwork for the globalized world we know today. The Silk Road, once a land-bound route, now extended across the seas, its paths traced by the steady hand of the compass. Empires rose and fell, their fates tied to the ships that sailed under its guidance. But with this newfound power came questions. How did the compass alter the balance of power between East and West? And what unforeseen consequences did its spread unleash? The legacy of the lodestone. The invention of the compass was a quiet revolution, a moment when human ingenuity harnessed the forces of nature to reshape the world. It was not the work of a single genius, but the culmination of centuries of curiosity and craftsmanship. The compass became a symbol of exploration, a tool that guided not just ships, but the course of history itself. From the bustling ports of China to the distant shores of the New World, its influence was felt across the globe. Yet for all its impact, the compass remains a humble instrument, a reminder that even the smallest discoveries can change everything. As we look back on this forgotten event, we are left with a sense of wonder. What other secrets lie hidden in the annals of history, waiting to be uncovered? And how might they reshape our understanding of the world? As the sun sets on the ancient ports of the Song dynasty, we are left with more questions than answers. What other forgotten events await us in the shadows of history? The invention of the compass is a reminder that the past is never truly silent. It whispers through the waves, through the winds, through the dreams of those who dare to listen. Tulip Mania, the flower that broke an empire. The 17th century was a time of unparalleled prosperity for the Netherlands. The Dutch Republic, fueled by its mastery of trade and commerce, had become one of the wealthiest nations in Europe. Its cities buzzed with activity. Merchants haggled in bustling markets, ships laden with exotic goods docked in busy harbors, and artists and scientists pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. It was an era of opulence, where the pursuit of beauty and luxury knew no bounds. And in this golden age, a new obsession took root, one that would captivate the nation and lead to one of history's most astonishing financial crises, tulip mania. But how did a simple flower become the center of such madness? And what lessons does this forgotten event hold for us today? A flower, unlike any other. Enter the tulip, a flower unlike any other. Originally hailing from the Ottoman Empire, tulips arrived in Europe in the mid 16th century, their vibrant colors and elegant shapes quickly capturing the imagination of the continent's elite. In the Netherlands, tulips became more than just a flower. They became a symbol of status, a mark of sophistication. The rarest varieties, with their intricate patterns and striking hues, were coveted by the wealthy, who displayed them in their gardens and homes as badge of their refined taste. But as demand grew, so too did the prices of these floral treasures. What began as a passion for beauty soon morphed into something far more intoxicating, a frenzy of speculation, the rise of the tulip traders. As tulips grew in popularity, a new breed of entrepreneur emerged, the tulip trader. These savvy businessmen saw an opportunity to profit from the flower's allure. They began buying and selling tulip bulbs, often before they had even bloomed, betting on their future value. The tulip market was born, and with it, a speculative fever that would sweep the nation. Prices for tulip bulbs began to climb, slowly at first, then with dizzying speed. The rarest bulbs, those with unique color patterns caused by a mysterious virus, became the most sought after. One such variety, the Semper Augustus, with its flame-like streaks of red on white petals, was rumored to be worth as much as a grand Amsterdam townhouse. But how could a simple flower command such staggering sums? And what drove ordinary people to stake their fortunes on something so ephemeral, the peak of madness? By the winter of 1636, the tulip market had reached a fever pitch. Prices soared to astronomical heights, with single bulbs trading for sums that could buy a fleet of ships or a lifetime's worth of luxury. In one infamous transaction, a single viceroy tulip bulb was sold for 2 lasts of wheat, 4 lasts of rye, 4 fat oxen, 8 fat swine, 12 fat sheep, 2 hogsheads of wine, 4 tons of beer, 2 tons of butter, 1,000 pounds of cheese, a bed, a suit of clothes, and a silver drinking cup. It was a deal that defied reason, yet it was just one of many. The tulip had become a currency unto itself, a symbol of wealth and a ticket to prosperity. People from all walks of life, nobles, merchants, even farmers, were caught up in the frenzy, buying and selling bulbs in a desperate bid to strike it rich. But beneath the surface, the foundations of this floral empire were beginning to crack. What happens when a market built on dreams collides with reality? And how does a nation awaken from such an intoxicating slumber? The bursting of the bubble. The end came swiftly, like a storm on a clear day. In February 1637, in the city of Haarlem, a tulip auction failed to attract buyers for the first time. The news spread like wildfire, and panic set in. Sellers, desperate to offload their bulbs, slashed prices, but the buyers had vanished. The tulip market, once a roaring blaze, was now a smoldering ember. Prices plummeted, falling faster than they had risen. Bulbs that had once commanded fortunes were now worthless, their value evaporating overnight. Fortunes were lost, livelihoods destroyed, and the nation was left reeling. But what caused this sudden collapse? Was it simply a matter of supply and demand, or was there something deeper at play? The aftermath and lessons learned. In the wake of the crash, the Dutch economy staggered but did not fall. The tulip market had been a bubble, inflated by speculation and detached from reality, but it was not the backbone of the nation's wealth. Life returned to normal, though the scars of tulip mania lingered. The event became a cautionary tale, a lesson in the dangers of unchecked greed and the fragility of markets. Economists would later study it as one of the first recorded speculative bubbles, a precursor to modern financial crises. But beyond the economics, tulip mania was a human story, a tale of desire, ambition, and the timeless allure of beauty. What drives us to chase such fleeting dreams? And how do we find meaning in the aftermath of their collapse? As the tulip petals fell and the markets cooled, the people of the Netherlands were left to ponder these questions. The mania had passed, but its echoes would resonate through history, a reminder that even the most beautiful dreams can turn to dust when rooted in illusion. The Battle of Myeongnyang, 1597, a naval miracle against all odds. Picture a narrow strait, its waters churning with fierce tidal currents, flanked by rugged cliffs and shrouded in the mists of dawn. The air is thick with tension, the silence broken only by the creaking of wooden ships and the distant cry of seabirds. This is the Myeongnyang Strait, a place where history would be written in blood and fire. It is here in 1597 that one of the most remarkable naval battles in history unfolded, a battle where courage, strategy, and sheer willpower turned the tide of war. This is the story of the Battle of Myeongnyang, where Korean Admiral Yi Sun-sin, with just 13 ships, faced a Japanese fleet of over 130 vessels. How did a battle so lopsided become a triumph? And what secrets does it hold about the power of leadership and the will to survive? A war that shaped a nation. To understand the miracle of Myeongnyang, we must first step back into the chaos of the Imjin War. It was 1592, and Japan, under the ambitious warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi, had launched a brutal invasion of Korea, aiming to conquer not just the peninsula, but Ming China beyond. The Korean forces, caught off guard, were quickly overwhelmed on land. But at sea, the story was different. The Korean Navy, under the command of Admiral Yi Sun-sin, became the last line of defense, disrupting Japanese supply lines and winning a series of stunning victories. Yi Sun-sin was no ordinary commander. A scholar and a strategist, he had revolutionized naval warfare with his innovative tactics and the fearsome geobuxion, or turtle ships, armored vessels that struck terror into the hearts of the enemy. His most famous victory came at the Battle of Hansan Island, where his crane wing formation decimated the Japanese fleet. Yet despite his successes, Yi was a victim of court intrigue. Jealous rivals accused him of treason, leading to his imprisonment and demotion. It seemed that Korea's greatest defender had been cast aside. But as the Japanese renewed their offensive, the Korean court had no choice but to reinstate him. When Yi returned to the navy, he found it in ruins, most of the ships destroyed or captured, and only 13 vessels remaining. The Japanese, sensing victory, amassed a fleet of over 130 ships to crush the last remnants of Korean resistance. The stage was set for a confrontation that would defy all odds. A desperate stand. In the autumn of 1597, the Japanese fleet sailed toward the Myeongnyang Strait, confident that their overwhelming numbers would sweep aside the meager Korean force. Admiral Yi, however, saw an opportunity where others saw only despair. He knew the strait well. Its narrow channel and powerful tidal currents could be turned into a weapon. The currents were treacherous, shifting rapidly and creating whirlpools that could disorient even the most experienced sailors. Yi positioned his 13 ships in a defensive line across the strait, anchoring them against the tide. His plan was simple but daring. Use the geography to negate the Japanese numerical advantage and force them into a chaotic, close quarters battle. As the sun rose on October 26th, 1597, the Japanese fleet entered the strait, their sails blotting out the horizon. The sight of the massive armada would have broken the spirit of lesser men, but Yi stood resolute on the deck of his flagship. He knew that retreat was not an option. Behind him lay the Korean coast, vulnerable to invasion. This was a battle for survival, not just for his fleet, but for his nation. With a calm voice, he addressed his men. "He who seeks death shall live, and he who seeks life shall die." His words, simple yet profound, steeled their hearts. But could 13 ships truly stand against 130? The answer would soon be written in the churning waters of Myeongnyang. The battle unfolds. As the Japanese fleet advanced, the tidal currents began to shift, just as Yi had anticipated. The narrow strait funneled the enemy ships into a bottleneck, their numbers becoming a liability rather than an asset. The Japanese vessels, caught in the swirling waters, struggled to maintain formation. Yi seized the moment, ordering his ships to open fire with their cannons and archers. The Korean ships, smaller and more maneuverable, darted in and out of the fray, striking like wolves among a herd of sheep. The Japanese, unable to bring their full strength to bear, became disorganized. Their ships collided, their oars tangled, and their commanders' shouts were drowned out by the roar of the currents. Yi's flagship led the charge, its iron-plated hull ramming into enemy vessels, splintering wood and scattering sailors into the sea. At one point, the flagship was surrounded, its deck swarming with Japanese boarders. Yi, undeterred, fought alongside his men, his sword flashing in the sunlight. His courage inspired his crew to fight with renewed ferocity, repelling the attackers and turning the tide of the melee. For hours the battle raged, the waters turning red with blood, and the air thick with smoke and the cries of the wounded. But slowly, inexorably, the Korean fleet began to gain the upper hand. The Japanese, demoralized and battered, started to retreat, their once mighty armada reduced to a fleeing rabble. By the end of the day, over 30 Japanese ships had been sunk or captured, while the Koreans lost not a single vessel. It was a victory that defied belief, a naval miracle that would echo through the annals of history. The aftermath and legacy. The Battle of Myeongnyang was more than a tactical triumph. It was a turning point in the Imjin War. The Japanese, stunned by the defeat, were forced to rethink their strategy, their supply lines disrupted, and their morale shattered. For the Koreans, it was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, victory was possible. Admiral Yi Sun-sin, already a hero, became a legend, a symbol of resilience and ingenuity. But Yi's story did not end at Myeongnyang. He continued to lead the Korean Navy to further victories, his brilliance on the seas unmatched. Tragically, he was mortally wounded in the final battle of the war in 1598, his last words urging his men to keep fighting. His death was a profound loss, but his legacy lived on. The Battle of Myeongnyang became a testament to the power of leadership, strategy, and the indomitable will to survive. It showed that even when outnumbered, a small force, guided by wisdom and courage, could overcome the mightiest of foes. As the waves of Myeongnyang calmed and the smoke cleared, the world was left to ponder the lessons of this forgotten battle. What secrets does it hold about the nature of warfare and the strength of the human spirit? And how does its story resonate in a world still shaped by the echoes of conflict? As the sun sets on the waters of Myeongnyang, we are left with more questions than answers. What other forgotten events lie hidden in the shadows of history, waiting to be uncovered? The Battle of Myeongnyang is a reminder that the past is never truly silent. It whispers through the waves, through the winds, through the dreams of those who dare to listen. The Halifax Explosion, 1917, a day that shook the world. Picture a cold December morning in 1917. The harbor of Halifax, Nova Scotia, hums with life. Ships slice through the icy waters, their decks heavy with the tools of war, munitions, fuel, and hope for a world caught in the grip of conflict. The docks echo with the shouts of sailors and the clatter of machinery, while families in the city above go about their daily routines, unaware that this day will soon be carved into history. This is the story of the Halifax Explosion, a moment when the ordinary turned catastrophic, when a single spark ignited a disaster that would ripple across time. What led to this devastating collision? And how did a city find the courage to rise from its ashes? A harbor on the edge. Halifax in 1917 was no ordinary town. It was a lifeline, a beating heart for Canada's role in the Great War. The harbor was a gateway to the Atlantic, a staging ground where ships gathered before braving the treacherous journey to Europe. Every day, vessels loaded with troops and supplies streamed through its waters, their hulls packed with the raw power needed to fuel the fight. But with that power came peril. The harbor was a maze of steel and steam, a place where one wrong move could ignite chaos. On December 6th, two ships entered this fragile dance. The SS Mont Blanc, a French freighter, crept into the harbor, its hold brimming with danger, over 2,300 tons of picric acid, 200 tons of TNT, 35 tons of benzene, and 10 tons of gun cotton. It was a floating bomb, a secret weapon bound for the battlefields. Across the water, the SS Amo, a Norwegian ship on a mission of mercy, steamed toward its exit, delayed and impatient. What could go wrong in a harbor so vital, so alive? The answer was everything. The fatal encounter. The morning was crisp and clear as the Mont Blanc navigated the Narrows, the tightest stretch of the harbor. The Imo, moving faster than it should, barreled through the same passage. Rules of the sea demanded caution, but war had a way of bending rules. A flurry of whistle blasts and shouted orders failed to stop the inevitable. At 8:46 a.m., the Imo's bow sliced into the Mont Blanc's side, tearing through steel and spilling benzene onto the deck. A spark flared. Flames leapt skyward. The Mont Blanc's crew knew the truth. This was no ordinary fire. With minutes ticking down to disaster, they abandoned ship, rowing desperately for shore, shouting warnings no one understood. On the docks, in the streets, and at windows overlooking the harbor, the people of Halifax gathered, drawn by the sight of a burning ship. They had no idea what was coming. Could a single mistake really unravel a city? The clock was ticking, the blast that broke the sky. At 9:04 a.m., the world erupted. The Mont Blanc detonated with a force that shattered reality. 2.9 kilotons of TNT, a blast so immense it rivaled a fraction of an atomic bomb. The sky turned to fire, the earth trembled, and a shockwave roared through Halifax like a vengeful god. Buildings collapsed as if made of paper. Windows exploded into deadly shards, raining glass on those below. The harbor itself seemed to rebel. Its waters sucked away before crashing back in a tsunami that swallowed homes and lives. In an instant, over 1,600 souls were gone. Thousands more lay wounded, their screams piercing the smoke-choked air. Fires blazed from broken gas lines, devouring what the blast had spared. The city was a ruin, 9,000 people homeless, their world reduced to rubble. Yet amid the horror, flickers of humanity shone through. A neighbor pulled a child from the wreckage. A sailor carried a stranger to safety. Could hope survive in such darkness? The answer was unfolding in the streets. A community unbroken. The aftermath was a nightmare painted in ash and blood. Survivors stumbled through the debris, searching for loved ones, their faces streaked with soot and tears. But Halifax did not surrender. As the fires burned, help came, first from within, then from beyond. Doctors worked without rest, their hands steady despite exhaustion. Volunteers braved the chaos to bring aid, and from afar, the world responded. Boston sent a train brimming with supplies and healers, a lifeline that bound two cities forever. Each year, Halifax returns the favor with a Christmas tree, a quiet thank you whispered across the miles. The government scrambled to understand the disaster. An inquiry pointed to human error, missteps in navigation, ignored warnings, the rush of war. New laws were forged promising safer seas. But the true story wasn't in the rules, it was in the people. How did they rebuild from nothing? What drove them to stand when everything had fallen? Echoes of resilience. Today, Halifax bears the scars of that day, but they are scars of strength. The harbor thrives again, its waters calm but never forgetful. Memorials dot the city, silent sentinels to the lost and the brave. The Halifax Explosion wasn't just a tragedy, it was a crucible, forging a legacy of unity and endurance. It taught the world how to respond to calamity, how to mend what's broken. As the waves lap against the shore, they carry questions. What other stories now lie buried in the past, waiting to be told? What can we learn from a city that faced the abyss and chose to live? The Halifax Explosion is more than history. It's a voice calling us to listen, to remember, to wonder what comes next. The Algeciras Conference, 1906, the diplomatic duel that reshaped Europe. Imagine a sun-drenched coastal town in southern Spain where the scent of orange blossoms mingles with the salty breeze from the Mediterranean. It is January 1906, and the world's most powerful nations have gathered in Algeciras, not for leisure, but for a high-stakes game of diplomacy. The prize? Control over Morocco, a land rich in resources and strategic importance. The players? Europe's mightiest empires, each with their own ambitions, alliances, and animosities. At the heart of it all, two rivals stand ready to clash, France and Germany. This is the story of the Algeciras Conference, a forgotten moment when the fate of nations hung in the balance and the world edged closer to the abyss of war. How did a dispute over a distant land nearly ignite a global conflict? And what secrets does this diplomatic duel reveal about the fragile peace of early 20th century Europe, a crisis in the desert? To understand the drama of Algeciras, we must first journey to the sands of Morocco. By the early 1900s, this North African kingdom had become a chessboard for European powers hungry for influence. France, with its colonial ambitions, sought to extend its control over Morocco, eyeing its resources and strategic location. But Germany, under the assertive leadership of Kaiser Wilhelm II, was not content to watch from the sidelines. The Kaiser, determined to challenge French dominance and assert Germany's growing power, made a bold move. In March 1905, he landed in Tangier, Morocco, and delivered a provocative speech, declaring support for Moroccan independence and demanding equal access for all nations. It was a direct challenge to France, and a spark that nearly set Europe ablaze. The Kaiser's visit triggered what history remembers as the First Moroccan Crisis. Tensions soared as France and Germany edged toward confrontation, their allies nervously watching from the wings. War seemed a real possibility, but cooler heads prevailed. Instead of swords, the nations agreed to settle their differences with words at a conference in Algeciras. Yet beneath the veneer of diplomacy, the stakes were higher than ever. Could a peaceful resolution be found, Or was this merely a prelude to a greater storm, the gathering storm? On January 16th, 1906, delegates from 13 nations arrived in Algeciras, a picturesque town overlooking the Strait of Gibraltar. The setting was serene, but the atmosphere was anything but. Representatives from France, Germany, Britain, Spain, the United States, and others took their seats, each carrying the weight of their nation's interests. The conference was a diplomatic battlefield where every word, every gesture could tip the balance of power. At the center of the storm were two key figures, Maurice Rouvier, the French Prime Minister, and Joseph Maria von Radowitz, the German envoy. Rouvier, a seasoned politician, was determined to secure France's foothold in Morocco, backed by Britain and Spain through secret agreements. Radowitz, a skilled diplomat, sought to curb French influence and assert Germany's right to a share of the spoils. Yet neither could afford to appear too aggressive. Europe was a powder keg, and one wrong move could ignite it. Who would emerge victorious in this battle of wits? And what role would the other nations play in this delicate dance? A game of alliances. As the conference unfolded, the delegates engaged in a complex web of negotiations, alliances, and betrayals. France, confident in its support from Britain, pushed for control over Morocco's police and finances, a move that would solidify its dominance. Germany, however, was not without its own cards to play. Radowitz skillfully courted the smaller nations, appealing to their desire for economic opportunities in Morocco. He argued for an open door policy, ensuring equal access for all, a direct challenge to France's ambitions. But Germany faced a formidable obstacle: isolation. The Entente Cordiale, a pact between France and Britain, loomed large, and Spain, too, had aligned itself with the French. Even the United States, represented by the affable Henry White, leaned toward France, though officially neutral. Behind the scenes, President Theodore Roosevelt, a master of diplomacy, quietly urged compromise, fearing that a failure at Algeciras could destabilize Europe. Could Germany break through this wall of opposition? Or would France's alliances prove too strong to overcome? Tensions behind closed doors. The negotiations were grueling, stretching over 3 long months. Tempers flared, and personal rivalries simmered beneath the surface. Radowitz, known for his sharp tongue, clashed repeatedly with the French delegates, his frustration palpable. Rouvier, meanwhile, navigated the proceedings with a calm demeanor, though privately he feared that Germany's stubbornness could derail the talks. The delegates' interactions were a microcosm of Europe's broader tensions: distrust, pride, and the ever-present shadow of war. Yet amid the discord, moments of levity emerged. The delegates, hailing from different cultures and languages, often found themselves lost in translation. Misunderstandings led to awkward exchanges, and the occasional diplomatic faux pas provided brief respite from the weighty discussions. These human touches reminded all present that for all their power, they were still mortal men, grappling with forces larger than themselves. What hidden dramas played out in the corridors of Algeciras? And how did these personal dynamics shape the conference's outcome? The Algeciras Act, a fragile peace. After weeks of deadlock, a compromise was finally reached. On April 7th, 1906, the delegates signed the Algeciras Act. a treaty that affirmed Morocco's independence but placed its police and finances under international control. France and Spain were granted significant influence, with the right to station troops in key areas. Germany, though it secured some economic concessions, emerged largely isolated, its ambitions checked by the united front of France and its allies. The treaty was hailed as a victory for diplomacy, a peaceful resolution to a crisis that had threatened to engulf Europe in war. Yet beneath the surface, the fault lines remained. The conference had exposed the deepening divisions between the great powers, particularly the growing rift between Germany and the Franco British alliance. It was a temporary truce, not a lasting peace. How did the Algeciras Conference set the stage for the cataclysm that would follow? And what lessons does it hold for the delicate art of diplomacy? A prelude to war. In the years after Algeciras, the tensions that had simmered in the conference halls of Spain continued to fester. The alliances forged and rivalries deepened would play a pivotal role in the outbreak of World War I less than a decade later. The conference, though successful in averting immediate conflict, was a harbinger of the greater storm to come. It revealed the fragility of Europe's balance of power and the dangers of imperial ambition. For Morocco, the treaty marked the beginning of a new chapter. France's influence grew, leading to the eventual establishment of a protectorate in 1912. The dreams of independence, so fiercely defended by the Kaiser, faded into the background as Europe's gaze turned inward toward the looming shadows of war. What might have happened if the conference had failed, and how did this forgotten event shape the world we know today? As the delegates departed Algeciras, the sun set on a world teetering on the edge. The Algeciras Conference was a fleeting moment of peace, a brief pause in the march toward conflict. It was a reminder that diplomacy, though fraught with peril, could still avert disaster, if only for a time. Yet the echoes of those negotiations would reverberate through history, a whisper of the tensions that would soon engulf the globe. The story of Algeciras is not just a tale of treaties and talks, it is a window into the human heart, where pride, fear, and ambition collide. It is a reminder that even in the grand halls of power, the smallest misstep can change the course of history. And as the world moved closer to the abyss, the lessons of Algeciras lingered, a quiet warning of the storms yet to come. The Great Migration of the Pueblo people, 13th century, a journey through the sands of time. In the heart of the American Southwest, where the sun paints the cliffs in hues of red and gold, the Pueblo people thrived for centuries. Their adobe villages, nestled among the mesas and canyons, were marvels of ingenuity, built to withstand the harsh desert climate. These multi-story dwellings, with their thick walls and small windows, provided shelter from the scorching heat and biting cold. The Pueblo people were skilled farmers, coaxing life from the arid soil through intricate irrigation systems that channeled precious water to their crops of corn, beans, and squash. Their society was tightly knit, bound by communal rituals and a deep reverence for the land that sustained them. But in the 13th century, a shadow fell over this harmonious existence, a shadow that would force them to leave their ancestral homes and embark on a journey into the unknown, a land of beauty and challenge. The Pueblo people lived in a landscape of stark beauty and formidable challenges. Towering mesas rose like sentinels over the desert floor, their sheer cliffs carved by the relentless winds. Deep canyons snaked through the earth, their walls etched with the stories of time. The air was dry, the sun unforgiving, and water was a treasure more precious than gold. Yet the Pueblo people had learned to thrive in this environment, their lives attuned to the rhythms of the land. They built their homes from adobe, mud bricks dried in the sun, and stacked them into multi level structures that clung to the cliffs or sprawled across the plains. These villages were more than shelters. They were centers of community where families gathered to share meals, stories, and sacred ceremonies. The Pueblo people honored the spirits of the earth, the sky, and the water, their rituals a tapestry of song, dance, and prayer. Their pottery, adorned with intricate designs, was both functional and sacred, a reflection of their connection to the world around them. But beneath this thriving culture, the seeds of change were stirring. What forces were at play that would disrupt this delicate balance? And how would the Pueblo people respond to the challenges ahead? The winds of change. By the late 12th century, the Pueblo world began to shift. The climate, once predictable, became erratic. A prolonged drought gripped the land, its merciless grip tightening with each passing year. Rivers dwindled to trickles, and the once fertile fields turned to dust. The intricate irrigation systems, which had sustained their crops for generations, could no longer coax life from the parched soil. The specter of famine loomed, and the people grew restless. But the drought was not the only challenge. Archaeological evidence suggests that social pressures were mounting as well. Populations had grown, and resources were stretched thin. Conflicts with neighboring tribes, perhaps driven by competition for dwindling water and food, may have added to the strain. Some scholars believe that internal disputes, possibly over leadership or religious practices, further fractured the communities. Whatever the causes, the Pueblo people faced a stark choice: adapt or perish. How did they confront this existential threat? And what decision would they make in the face of such adversity? The Great Migration begins. In the early 13th century, the Pueblo people made a momentous decision. They would leave their ancestral homes and seek new lands where they could rebuild their lives. This was no small undertaking. Entire villages packed their belongings, gathered their families, and set out on a journey into the unknown. They traveled in groups, their footsteps tracing paths through the desert sands and along the rugged canyon walls. The migration was not a single event, but a series of movements over decades, as different communities sought refuge in new territories. The routes they took were as varied as the people themselves. Some headed south toward the Rio Grande Valley, where the river's waters promised fertility. Others ventured west into the highlands of Arizona, where the mountains offered shelter and resources. Along the way, they faced countless challenges: harsh weather, scarce food, and the ever-present threat of conflict. Yet the Pueblo people persevered, their resilience a testament to their strength and unity. What stories did they carry with them on this journey? And how did the migration shape their identity as a people? A new chapter in the desert. As the Pueblo people settled into their new homes, they began to adapt to their surroundings. They built new villages, incorporating the lessons learned from their ancestors while embracing the unique features of their new environments. In the Rio Grande Valley, they constructed pueblos along the riverbanks, their fields irrigated by the life giving waters. In Arizona, they carved homes into the cliffs, creating dwellings that blended seamlessly with the landscape. The migration also brought about cultural shifts. As different groups came into contact with one another, they exchanged ideas, technologies, and traditions. New forms of pottery emerged, their designs a fusion of old and new. Religious practices evolved, reflecting the challenges and triumphs of the journey. The Pueblo people's social structures adapted as well, with some communities forming alliances to strengthen their resilience. How did these changes enrich their culture? And what legacy did the migration leave for future generations? Echoes of the past. The Great Migration of the Pueblo people was not just a moment in time, it was a turning point that shaped the course of their history. The challenges they faced and the choices they made during this period forged a new chapter in their story, one of adaptation, resilience, and renewal. Today, the descendants of the Pueblo people continue to honor their heritage, their traditions a living link to the past. Archaeological sites across the Southwest bear witness to this epic journey. The ruins of ancient pueblos, with their crumbling walls and silent courtyards, tell the story of a people who refused to be defined by adversity. Artifacts, pottery shards, tools, and sacred objects offer glimpses into their daily lives and spiritual beliefs. Through these remnants, we can piece together the narrative of a civilization that endured, even in the face of overwhelming odds. What lessons can we learn from their journey? And how does their story resonate in a world still grappling with change and uncertainty? As the sun sets over the mesas, casting long shadows across the desert, we are left with a sense of wonder. The great migration of the Pueblo people is a reminder that the past is never truly lost. It lives on in the stories we tell, the traditions we cherish, and the dreams we dare to pursue. The invention of the knitting machine in England, 1589, the device that wove the future. As we reach the final chapter of our journey through forgotten events that shaped the world, we find ourselves in the quiet villages of 16th century England, where a humble clergyman's curiosity would spark a revolution. This is the story of the knitting machine, a modest invention that would unravel the old ways of textile production and weave the fabric of the modern world. It is a tale of innovation, perseverance, and the quiet genius that often lies hidden in the most unexpected places. How did a simple device change the course of history? And what secrets does its invention hold about the dawn of the industrial age? A world bound by hand. In the late 1500s, England was a land of rolling hills, bustling markets, and cottage industries. In homes across the countryside, the rhythmic click of knitting needles filled the air as women and men labored to produce stockings, scarves, and sweaters. Knitting was not just a craft, it was a livelihood, a painstaking process that required hours of meticulous work for even the simplest garment. The demand for knitted goods was growing, especially for the fashionable silk stockings worn by the nobility, but the supply was limited by the speed of human hands. It was a world where every stitch was a testament to patience and skill, but also a world ripe for change. In the small village of Calverton, Nottinghamshire, a young clergyman named William Lee watched this labor unfold. Lee was not a craftsman by trade, but he was a man of keen observation and restless curiosity. Legend has it that his inspiration came from watching his wife or a local woman knit, her fingers moving deftly but slowly. He wondered, could there be a faster way? Could a machine replicate the intricate dance of needles and yarn? It was a question that would consume him, driving him to the edge of obsession. What would it take to turn this vision into reality? And how would his invention alter the lives of those who depended on the craft? The birth of the knitting machine. William Lee's journey was not an easy one. With no background in engineering, he faced skepticism and ridicule from those around him. Yet he was undaunted. He began experimenting with wooden frames and metal hooks, painstakingly trying to mimic the looping motion of hand knitting. His early attempts were crude, their mechanisms clunky and prone to breaking. Yarn tangled, stitches dropped, and frustration mounted. But Lee was a man possessed by his idea, and he refused to give up. After years of trial and error, in 1589, Lee unveiled his creation, the stocking frame, the world's first knitting machine. It was a marvel of ingenuity, a wooden contraption with rows of hooks that could produce knitted fabric at a speed far beyond human hands. With a single operator, the machine could knit a row of stitches in seconds, a task that would take a skilled knitter minutes to complete. Lee's invention was not just faster, it was revolutionary. It promised to transform the textile industry, making knitted goods more accessible and affordable than ever before. But would the world embrace this new technology? Or would tradition stand in its way? A struggle for acceptance. Lee's invention was met with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The potential was clear, but so were the fears. Many knitters, whose livelihoods depended on their craft, saw the machine as a threat, a mechanical beast that could steal their jobs and devalue their skills. Lee faced resistance from guilds and workers alike, who petitioned against the spread of his device. Even Queen Elizabeth I, upon witnessing a demonstration, was hesitant. She feared the social upheaval it might cause and denied Lee a patent, urging him to refine his machine for coarser wool rather than the delicate silk stockings she favored. Undaunted, Lee continued to improve his design, but the road was fraught with challenges. He struggled to secure funding, and his efforts to introduce the machine in France were met with similar resistance. It seemed that the world was not yet ready for the change he envisioned. Yet Lee's persistence laid the groundwork for future success. His machine, though slow to gain acceptance, would eventually become the cornerstone of the mechanized textile industry. What lessons did Lee's struggle teach about innovation and resistance? And how did his invention pave the way for the Industrial Revolution? The legacy of the stocking frame. Though William Lee did not live to see the full impact of his creation, his knitting machine would go on to change the world. By the 18th century, improvements to the stocking frame had made it a staple of the textile industry, with factories springing up across England and beyond. The machine's efficiency fueled the mass production of clothing, making knitted goods available to people of all classes. It was a quiet revolution, one that transformed not just the economy, but the very fabric of society. The knitting machine also played a pivotal role in the broader Industrial Revolution, serving as a precursor to more complex machinery that would automate other industries. It was a symbol of the shift from handcraft to mechanization, a harbinger of the modern age. Today, knitting machines have evolved into sophisticated devices, their digital descendants capable of producing intricate patterns with the touch of a button. Yet at their core, they still echo the genius of William Lee's original design. How has this invention shaped the world we live in? And what does its story reveal about the power of a single idea? A farewell to our journey. As we close the final chapter of our journey through forgotten events that changed everything, we reflect on the stories we've uncovered, from the chaos of the Nika Riots to the quiet ingenuity of the knitting machine. Each tale, though distant in time, carries a whisper of the human spirit's resilience, creativity, and courage. These events, often overlooked, remind us that history is not just a series of grand battles or famous names. It is a tapestry woven from countless threads, each one vital to the whole. Thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this voyage through the shadows of the past. As you drift into sleep, let these stories linger in your dreams, a gentle reminder that even the smallest spark can ignite a revolution. May your nights be peaceful and your dreams filled with the echoes of history. Good night,